Cleopatra, the last pharaoh's legacy. The asp coiled in its basket, docile but deadly, as Queen Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last true pharaoh of Egypt, contemplated the mathematical precision of power. After 22 years of rule, thousands of political calculations, and two of history's most famous love affairs, her final sum had come due. Outside her marble-columned mausoleum, Octavian's legions were tightening their grip on Alexandria. The Mediterranean's greatest port city, with its gleaming lighthouse and unrivaled library, would soon fall to Rome. But Cleopatra, even in defeat, remained what she had always been, a queen who wrote her own rules. The Roman propagandists would later paint her as a seductress who destroyed great men with her exotic charms, a convenient fiction that revealed far more about their own fears than about the remarkable woman who had outmaneuvered them for decades. The truth was both simpler and more extraordinary. This was a woman who could debate philosophy in 9 languages, command fleets in battle, and navigate the treacherous waters of 1st century BCE politics with an acumen that still startles historians 2 millennia later. "Let us prepare our next move carefully," she had once told Julius Caesar, "for when we queens play the game of empire, we play for keeps." Now, in her final hours, she played her last hand with the same cold brilliance that had characterized her entire reign. The asp was no desperate suicide, but rather her final act of defiance, a calculated chess move that would deny Octavian his greatest prize and cement her own legend for eternity. The story of how an adolescent princess transformed herself into the most powerful woman in the ancient world, outmaneuvering brothers who would kill her, seducing and strategizing her way through 2 civil wars, and nearly creating a new world order, begins not with her death, but with a teenage girl shivering in exile, watching her beloved Alexandria burn. To understand the queen with the asp, we must first meet the princess who would dare to dream of an empire. This is not just the story of a queen. It is the story of raw ambition, of genius unfettered by gender, and of a woman who understood that true power lies not in the cards you're dealt, but in how boldly you play them. Welcome to the world of Cleopatra, Queen of Kings. The game is about to begin. The Rise of Cleopatra, a Journey to Power. Alexandria, 69 BCE. As winter storms lashed the Mediterranean coast, the royal physicians huddled around Queen Cleopatra V as she delivered her namesake daughter into a world of gilded cages and deadly ambitions. Outside the palace windows, the greatest city on earth hummed with commerce and intrigue. Ships from 3 continents crowded the harbor, their holds stuffed with pepper from India, silk from China, and amber from the Baltic. But it was knowledge, not goods, that made Alexandria the crown jewel of the ancient world. The infant princess's first cries echoed through halls that housed the greatest library humanity had ever built. Here, in a complex of column-lined rooms and leafy courtyards, 500,000 scrolls contained virtually everything the ancient world knew, or thought it knew, about everything from astronomy to zoology. This would become young Cleopatra's true playground and the source of her most formidable weapon, her mind. Her father, Ptolemy Thethym Auletes, was both king and prisoner of his own legacy. The Ptolemaic dynasty had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, claiming descent from Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy Guri. Yet they remained stubbornly, proudly Greek, refusing to learn the Egyptian language of the people they governed, with one crucial exception. Little Cleopatra, driven by an uncanny political instinct that manifested almost as soon as she could speak, would shatter this tradition. "The girl devours languages like others devour sweets," her tutor Philostratos wrote in a surviving fragment. By age 7, she had mastered Greek, Egyptian, and Hebrew. By 12, she could switch effortlessly between Ethiopian, Arabic, Syriac, Median, Parthian, and Latin. Each language was a key that unlocked new realms of power, new ways to charm or intimidate or persuade. But Alexandria's splendor concealed rot at its foundations. The Ptolemaic Empire was crumbling, propped up by Roman gold and Roman patience. Young Cleopatra watched as her father crawled to Rome, begging for recognition, bleeding Egypt's treasury dry to buy influence with Roman senators. The court sneered at Ptolemy III's submission, nicknaming him Oletz, the flute player, for his habit of performing at decadent banquets while his kingdom teetered on the brink. In the palace's shadowy corridors, Cleopatra's siblings played at power like cubs practicing their bite. Her eldest sister Berenice dreamed of seizing the throne. Her brother Ptolemy XIII, younger but male and thus her future husband under Ptolemaic custom, watched her with wary eyes. They were all learning the same lesson. In Alexandria, family was simply politics by other means. While other royal children played with dolls, Cleopatra spent her days in the library's map room, studying the empire that would one day be hers. Her fingers traced coastlines from Parthia to Spain, memorizing ports, mountain passes, and trade routes. At night, she would climb to the palace roof with her tutors, learning to read the stars as both navigator and astrologer. She was preparing, though for what exactly even she might not have known. In 58 BCE, the storm that had been building finally broke. A palace coup sent Ptolemy V fleeing to Rome, taking his 12-year-old daughter with him. Berenice seized power, and Alexandria erupted in riots. As their ship pulled away from the great harbor, young Cleopatra watched the city's famous lighthouse diminish in the distance. The marble tower had guided countless ships to safety for centuries. Now its beam illuminated a different kind of lesson. Power, once lost, must be reclaimed through cunning, courage, and an absolute willingness to do whatever proves necessary. The education of Egypt's greatest queen was about to begin in earnest. Rome awaited, and with it, the chance to study power at its source. Cleopatra would spend 3 formative years observing how the Republic's leading men wielded influence, made alliances, and destroyed their enemies. She was learning the rules of a game she would later play with devastating skill, a game where the stakes were nothing less than the mastery of the known world. The teenage princess who left Alexandria was already brilliant. The woman who would return would be dangerous. Cleopatra's rise to power. The Alexandria that greeted Cleopatra's return in 55 BCE bore fresh scars from her sister Berenice's brief, brutal reign. Scorch marks stained the marble steps of the royal quarter. The great harbor, once crowded with merchant ships, now bristled with Roman warships. And in the palace corridors, courtiers who had enthusiastically supported Berenice's coup now fell over themselves to pledge loyalty to the restored Ptolemy V, at least to his face. Berenice's severed head adorned a spike above the palace gates, a stark reminder of the price of failure in Ptolemaic politics. The sight barely made Cleopatra flinch. Rome had hardened her. 3 years of watching the Republic's power brokers maneuver had taught her that sentiment was a luxury she could no longer afford. At 14, she became co-regent alongside her father, who now ruled through a combination of Roman backing and brute force. The once mocked flute player had returned with a vengeance, backed by the Roman general Gabinius and a small army of mercenaries. Those who had opposed him faced execution or fled, leaving their confiscated properties to fill the kingdom's depleted treasury. "The girl has her father's throne but her mother's steel," observed one Roman diplomat in a dispatch to the Senate. In those early days of co-rule, Cleopatra moved through the palace like a ghost, observing everything while revealing nothing. She sat silently through court proceedings, her dark eyes missing nothing, as petitioners and politicians pleaded their cases. Unlike her father, she had mastered Egyptian, and court whispers reported that she spent hours in conversation with priests and common merchants alike, building a network of loyal eyes and ears throughout the city. When Ptolemy V died in 51 BCE, he left a poison pill in his will. Cleopatra, now 18, would rule, but only as co-regent with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. Custom demanded they marry. Politics demanded one of them die. The real power initially lay with her brother's regents, the eunuch Pothinus, the general Achillas, and the rhetor Theodotus. This triumvirate of ambitious men saw the young queen as a temporary inconvenience, expecting to rule through the malleable boy king until he came of age. They gravely underestimated their opponent. Within months, Cleopatra began systematically stripping them of influence. Her face appeared alone on newly minted coins. Official documents increasingly bore only her signature. In public ceremonies, she took on the ancient pharaonic titles, Daughter of Ra, Lady of the Two Lands. She wasn't just queen, she was claiming the mantle of living goddess. The drought of 50 BCE proved the turning point. When the Nile failed to flood, famine threatened. While her brother's regents dithered, Cleopatra acted. She ordered the royal granaries open to the public and dispatched ships to Sicily for emergency grain supplies. More crucially, she performed the ancient ritual of supplication to the Nile gods in flawless Egyptian before massive crowds. The people saw a true Egyptian queen. The court saw their worst nightmare. Pothinus struck back, using his control of the treasury to undermine her. Grain shipments mysteriously vanished. Palace guards loyal to Cleopatra found themselves reassigned to distant desert outposts. The young Ptolemy, now 12, began publicly challenging his sister wife's decisions. In a bold countermove, Cleopatra withdrew from Alexandria to gather support in the countryside. It was here that she demonstrated another talent, military organization. As she moved through Upper Egypt, an army began to coalesce around her. Veterans, mercenaries, and local militias rallied to her banner, drawn by her growing reputation and generous promises of land and gold. But before she could strike, news arrived that would reshape the entire Mediterranean world. Julius Caesar had crossed the Rubicon. Civil war had erupted in Rome. Ptolemy's regents saw their chance. They launched a palace coup, declaring Cleopatra stripped of her titles. The queen who had entered exile with calculation would now have to fight her way back with steel. As she gathered her forces in the Syrian desert, Cleopatra received word that Pompey the Great, Rome's most powerful general, was fleeing Caesar's advance. He was heading for Egypt, seeking asylum. The great game was about to begin, and Cleopatra had already identified her perfect ally, not the desperate Pompey, but his brilliant pursuer. Caesar was coming to Alexandria, and Cleopatra had already devised an entrance that would ensure he never forgot her. Cleopatra's bold gambit in the shadow of Rome. History pivots on moments of audacity. In 48 BCE, as the autumn winds swept across Alexandria's harbor, Cleopatra orchestrated perhaps the boldest gambit in political history. Caesar had arrived to find a city in chaos, with young Ptolemy's forces besieging the royal quarter where the Roman general had installed himself. Pothinus and his conspirators had presented Caesar with Pompey's severed head, a miscalculation that filled the Roman with cold fury rather than gratitude. Enter Apollodorus the Sicilian, a merchant who had remained loyal to the exiled queen. His small fishing boat slipped through the harbor's defensive chains at dusk, bearing what appeared to be a mundane cargo, a roll of imported carpets bound for Caesar's quarters. No one thought to unroll them until they reached the Roman general's chambers. From within emerged Cleopatra, 21 years old, covered in wool lint, and armed with a plan to reshape the world. She did not merely enter the room, the historian Dio Cassius would later write, she conquered it. Contemporary accounts describe a woman who commanded attention not through conventional beauty, but through sheer force of personality. Her voice, melodious and perfectly controlled, shifted effortlessly between languages. Her wit sparkled. Her intelligence intimidated. Caesar, 27 years her senior and arguably the most powerful man in the world, found himself facing an equal. Their first conversation lasted through the night. By dawn, Caesar had committed himself to restoring Cleopatra to power. By the following sunset, young Ptolemy, realizing his sister had outmaneuvered him, fled the palace in rage, rallying the city to rebellion. What followed was the Alexandria War, a brutal urban conflict that nearly killed both Caesar and Cleopatra. The great library caught fire, thousands of irreplaceable scrolls turning to ash. The harbor burned. street fighting raged from quarter to quarter. Trapped in the royal palace, Caesar and Cleopatra found themselves commanding a desperate defense against overwhelming odds. Here, Cleopatra revealed another layer of her capabilities. She knew every secret passage in the palace complex, every hidden cache of weapons and supplies. Her network of loyal servants provided crucial intelligence about enemy movements. When food ran low, she knew which merchants would risk death to supply them. Every skill she had cultivated over years of palace intrigue now served to keep them alive. The arrival of reinforcements from Pergamon finally broke the siege. Ptolemy their famed drowned in the Nile while fleeing, weighted down by his golden armor, a death that contained more poetry than history usually provides. Cleopatra, now uncontested ruler of Egypt, stood beside Caesar as he addressed the conquered city. She wore the traditional regalia of a pharaoh, but with a crucial difference. She had modified the ancient designs to incorporate subtle Roman elements, presenting herself as a bridge between two worlds. The political masterstroke came 9 months later. Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar. The boy's arrival transformed what could have been dismissed as a mere love affair into a dynasty-founding moment. Cleopatra had given Caesar something his decades of conquest never had: a male heir. She promptly began minting coins showing herself as Isis and the infant as Horus, casting their union in terms every Egyptian would understand. When Caesar departed for Rome, Cleopatra had secured everything she needed: her throne, a powerful ally, and a child who could legitimately claim both Egyptian and Roman heritage. She had transformed exile into triumph, weakness into strength, and a desperate gamble into the foundation of an empire. But even as she consolidated her position, events were unfolding in Rome that would soon force her to risk everything she had gained. Caesar wanted her to visit the capital of the world he commanded. The queen who had conquered a conqueror would now have to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics at its very heart. Cleopatra began preparing for her greatest performance yet. Rome's senators, who had heard so many conflicting tales about Egypt's queen, were about to meet her for themselves. They had no idea what was coming: the rise of Cleopatra, Queen of Kings. Rome in 46 BCE was a city of marble and mud, power and poverty, where republican traditions clashed with imperial ambitions. Cleopatra's arrival caused a sensation. She established her court in Caesar's private gardens across the Tiber, in a villa whose luxury shocked conservative Romans. The Queen of Egypt had brought Alexandria's splendor to the heart of the Republic. Cicero, that great voice of Roman conservatism, found himself reluctantly attending her salon. "Her arrogance is beyond bearing," he wrote to a friend, "and yet one cannot help but attend when summoned." The Queen's dinners became the center of Roman political life, where senators debated philosophy with Egyptian priests while examining rare manuscripts from Alexandria's library. But beneath the glamour lay calculation. Each night's entertainment served multiple purposes. As guests reclined on gold-threaded couches, Cleopatra gathered intelligence about Rome's factional politics. While scholars argued over ancient texts, she evaluated which senators might be turned to her cause. She was mapping the power structure of the empire that both threatened and attracted her. Young Caesarion's presence in Rome carried explosive implications. Unlike Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, this child had the dictator's blood. Some Romans whispered that Caesar planned to name himself king, with his Egyptian son as heir. The rumors gained weight when a new statue appeared in the Temple of Venus Genetrix, showing Cleopatra as the goddess. No foreign ruler had ever received such honor. Then came the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Caesar's assassination shattered the political landscape. Cleopatra, who had planned to attend the Senate meeting that day, was warned away by her network of informants. Within hours, she had mobilized her household for departure. While Rome erupted in riots, the Egyptian queen slipped away with a precision that suggested long preparation. She had always known this day might come. Back in Alexandria, she moved with ruthless efficiency. Her younger brother and co-ruler Ptolemy XIV suddenly died, of natural causes that fooled no one. Caesarion, now 3 years old, was elevated as co-ruler. The message was clear: Cleopatra ruled alone. But Rome's civil war wouldn't leave her in peace. Both Octavian and Mark Antony sought Egypt's grain and gold to fund their armies. Cleopatra played a dangerous waiting game, officially backing neither while secretly preparing for all contingencies. She crushed a Cypriot rebellion, strengthened her fleet, and built up Alexandria's defenses. When famine struck Italy, she ensured that grain shipments reached the Roman poor, building popular support that could prove crucial in the coming crisis. The deadliest threat came from her own sister Arsinoe, who had been displayed in Caesar's triumph but subsequently exiled to Ephesus. From her temple sanctuary, Arsinoe began gathering supporters for another bid at the Egyptian throne. Cleopatra's response demonstrated how far she had come from the teenage queen who fled Alexandria. Assassins reached Arsinoe even in Diana's temple. The sister who had once driven Cleopatra into exile would never threaten her again. By 41 BCE, with Octavian and Antony dividing the Roman world between them, Cleopatra had achieved what no other foreign monarch had managed: true independence from Rome while maintaining crucial influence within it. She had transformed Egypt from a Roman client state into a power in its own right. When Mark Antony summoned her to Tarsus to explain her actions during the Civil War, many expected her to arrive as a supplicant. They didn't understand that Cleopatra was no longer playing by Rome's rules. She was writing her own. Her arrival at Tarsus would become legendary, but not for the reasons romance would suggest. The Queen of Egypt was about to demonstrate that seduction was merely one tool in the arsenal of power. And Mark Antony, who thought he was calling a vassal to heel, was about to meet his match in every sense of the word. Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the price of empire. Tarsus, 41 BCE. The citizens lining the river, Cydnus witnessed a spectacle designed to rewrite the rules of power politics. Cleopatra's royal barge approached through a haze of incense, its purple sails billowing in the warm breeze. Gold-tipped oars stroked the water in perfect rhythm. The queen reclined beneath a canopy studded with stars, dressed not as a penitent summoned by Rome's representative, but as Isis incarnate. Mark Antony, waiting in the forum, found his own carefully staged display of Roman authority upstaged. The man who had made kings kneel was kept waiting while Cleopatra's theatrical arrival drew every eye in the city. It was a calculated insult, a power move disguised as pageantry. When she finally deigned to come ashore, Antony discovered what Caesar had learned years before. In any room Cleopatra entered, everyone else became the audience. Their first private meeting lasted hours. Antony, brilliant in battle but often outmaneuvered in politics, faced a woman who had spent her life mastering both. She addressed him in flawless Latin, praised his military victories with detailed knowledge that stroked his ego, and then proceeded to systematically dismantle every charge against her with lawyer-like precision. By evening's end, Antony found himself defending his own actions in the civil war to her. The accused had become the questioner. Within days, he moved his court to Alexandria. What followed was more than the love affair of popular imagination. Cleopatra and Antony forged a political partnership that threatened to reshape the Mediterranean world. She gave him access to Egypt's vast wealth and grain supply, crucial for his planned Parthian campaign. He offered military might and Roman legitimacy to her expansionist ambitions. The donations of Alexandria revealed the scale of their vision. In a ceremony that scandalized Rome, Antony declared Caesarion the true heir of Julius Caesar and divided the eastern territories among Cleopatra's children. Cyprus, Libya, and portions of Syria came under Egyptian control. It was nothing less than an attempt to create a new empire centered on Alexandria rather than Rome. Their twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, followed by another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, cemented the union. Each child was carefully styled to represent different parts of their planned empire. One as an Eastern ruler, one as a Western monarch, linking continents under a new dynasty. Octavian, watching from Rome, understood the existential threat. His propaganda machine portrayed Antony as a drunk puppet dancing to an Oriental queen's tune. Cleopatra became the Egyptian whore in Roman poetry, a sorceress who had enchanted a great Roman hero. The truth that she was a brilliant strategist building an empire to rival Rome was far too dangerous to acknowledge. The partnership's fatal flaw lay in Antony's military setbacks. His Parthian campaign ended in costly failure. Crucial allies began hedging their bets. Cleopatra had staked everything on Antony's martial reputation, but now that reputation was crumbling. Yet she didn't abandon him, even when pragmatic politics suggested she should. Perhaps she recognized that Octavian would never allow her independent kingdom to survive. Perhaps she calculated that only bold action could salvage their position. Or perhaps, in a twist that later historians found hard to accept, the notorious seductress had genuinely fallen for her Roman partner. In 32 BCE, Octavian produced a propaganda masterstroke. He claimed to have stolen Antony's will from the Vestal Virgins. Its contents, probably forged, enraged Rome. Antony supposedly planned to move the capital to Alexandria and turn the Republic into an Eastern monarchy. The Senate stripped him of his powers and declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. The queen who had spent her life outmaneuvering enemies now faced her greatest challenge. The combined fleets of Egypt and Antony's Roman loyalists would face Octavian's forces at Actium. The future of the Mediterranean world hung in the balance. Cleopatra, who had never lost a political battle through miscalculation, was about to discover that even perfect strategy sometimes fails in the chaos of war. The great game was reaching its endgame, and the stakes were nothing less than the fate of empires. War for the world, the Battle of Actium and its aftermath. The morning of September 2nd, 31 BCE dawned with a light wind from the northwest, perfect conditions for Octavian's lighter vessels. In the Gulf of Actium, 200 ships of the Egyptian Antonian fleet lay at anchor, their massive hulls casting long shadows across the water. These were floating fortresses, many 9 tiers high, equipped with artillery and armored marines. Behind them, in the narrows of the Gulf, waited Cleopatra's personal squadron, 60 Egyptian warships carrying the royal treasury. Aboard his flagship, Antony had deployed his forces for a defensive battle. But Cleopatra had spotted what he hadn't. Agrippa, Octavian's brilliant admiral, was executing a subtle flanking maneuver that would soon cut off their retreat. Moreover, disease and desertion had left many of their ships undermanned. The Queen's cold mathematical mind calculated the odds and found them wanting. The battle began at mid-morning. Octavian's more nimble ships darted between Antony's lumbering vessels, avoiding direct combat while picking apart his formation. By early afternoon, the trap was closing. That's when Cleopatra gave the signal that would change history. Her squadron hoisted purple sails and drove straight through the middle of the battle line, breaking for the open sea. Antony, watching his partner's apparent flight, made the decision that would damn him in Roman eyes forever. He transferred to a fast quinquereme and followed. What looked like cowardice to Roman historians was actually a pre-arranged strategic withdrawal, but one executed too early, too chaotic. The abandoned fleet fought on until sunset before surrendering. They regrouped in Alexandria, but the defeat at Actium had shattered more than their naval power. Allies melted away. Herod of Judea, longtime friend to both Antony and Cleopatra, switched his allegiance to Octavian. The buffer kingdoms that had protected Egypt began falling to Rome's advance. Cleopatra responded with characteristic thoroughness. She executed potential traitors, consolidated the treasury, and even attempted to drag her ships across the isthmus to the Red Sea to escape to India. When that proved impossible, she began sending out peace feelers to Octavian while simultaneously strengthening Alexandria's defenses. The queen, who had once smuggled herself past enemy lines in a carpet, now worked feverishly to create secret escape routes. She built a hidden dock beneath her mausoleum and gathered exotic poisons, testing them on condemned prisoners to determine which brought the swiftest, most painless death. Every path was planned, every contingency considered. Antony, meanwhile, suffered a psychological collapse. The brilliant general who had conquered nations now spent his days fishing from the seawall, drinking heavily and reminiscing about past glories. When Octavian's army finally reached Alexandria in 30 BCE, Antony roused himself for one last cavalry charge. He drove back the Roman advance but found no army behind him. His forces had defected en masse. Bleeding from his last battle, Antony was hoisted by rope into Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she had barricaded herself with the royal treasury. He died in her arms, leaving her alone to face Octavian's cold ambition. The negotiation that followed was a duel between two grandmasters of political chess. Octavian needed Cleopatra alive for his triumph in Rome. She knew that parading her in chains through Rome's streets would validate every propaganda lie about the Eastern queen who had corrupted a Roman hero. Neither would concede their true intentions. Through intermediaries, they played their final game. Cleopatra demanded her children inherit Egypt. Octavian made vague promises while positioning troops to storm the mausoleum. She displayed signs of depression to lower his guard, while secretly preparing for either escape or a death that would deny him his greatest prize. In the end, she chose an ending worthy of the theatrical flair that had marked her reign. The manner of her death, whether by asp or poison, remains debated, but its impact was exactly what she had calculated. Octavian found her arranged on her golden couch, dressed in royal regalia, her most loyal servants dead at her feet. Even in defeat, she had seized control of her own narrative. Octavian, master of Rome but thwarted of his grandest spectacle, could only order artists to preserve the scene exactly as he found it. In death as in life, Cleopatra had forced the most powerful man in the world to adapt to her script rather than his own. Last days of Cleopatra, the enduring legacy of a queen. Alexandria fell silent when they heard their queen was dead. The markets emptied. The harbor stilled. Even the Roman soldiers, hardened by years of civil war, found themselves speaking in whispers. Inside the mausoleum, Octavian stood before Cleopatra's body with an expression that witnesses described as thunderstruck. The most powerful man in the world had been outmaneuvered one final time by a dead woman. His first action revealed his priorities. He dispatched his fastest runners to secure Caesarion. The 17-year-old heir to both Caesar and Cleopatra had been sent south weeks earlier, carrying a fortune in gold toward the kingdom of Kush. He made it as far as Berenice, a Red Sea port, before his own tutor betrayed him. Octavian had him executed immediately. Caesar's only blood son could not be allowed to live. The rest of Cleopatra's children faced different fates. The twins Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus vanished from history, their ends unrecorded but likely swift and quiet. Only Cleopatra Selene survived, taken to Rome to walk in Octavian's triumph. She would later become Queen of Mauretania, a client kingdom of Rome, where she named her own son Ptolemy, a final echo of her mother's dynasty. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, moved methodically to dismantle Cleopatra's legacy. Egypt's vast treasury, enough gold to double Rome's money supply overnight, was seized. The complex bureaucracy that had made Egypt the richest nation in the Mediterranean was turned to Rome's service. Alexandria's great scholars were offered comfortable positions in Rome, depleting the intellectual capital Cleopatra had so carefully cultivated. Yet even as Rome attempted to erase her, Cleopatra's ghost refused to fade. Her image appeared in Roman art with suspicious frequency for a supposedly hated enemy. Octavia, Antony's spurned Roman wife, raised Cleopatra's surviving children alongside her own, an act of mercy that suggested the Eastern sorceress of propaganda had commanded more respect than Rome cared to admit. The empire Cleopatra had dreamed of, a fusion of East and West with Alexandria at its heart, did not die with her. Within a century, Rome itself began shifting eastward. Emperors adopted the royal absolutism she had championed. The Roman Empire's center of gravity gradually moved toward Constantinople, a city that self-consciously modeled itself on Alexandria. Her final resting place remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Octavian allowed her to be buried with Antony, but ordered their tomb sealed and its location kept secret. Recent magnetometer surveys beneath Alexandria's modern streets have detected massive underground chambers that might hold the lost mausoleum. The search continues. In 2010, at an underwater site in Alexandria's harbor, archaeologists discovered a colossal stone head bearing the royal uraeus, the cobra emblem of pharaonic power. The features were those of a woman, worn by centuries under the sea but still commanding. Here was Cleopatra, as she had presented herself to her people. Not the seductress of Roman propaganda, but a monarch who had dared to challenge the existing world order. The last pharaoh's true victory lay not in the battles she won or lost, but in her vision of what empire could be. She had shown that power need not flow only from Rome, that civilization had more than one center, that a woman could dream of ruling the world and come within a hair's breadth of achieving it. 2,000 years later, we are still trying to understand her. Every generation reinterprets Cleopatra through its own lens, finding in her story whatever truth it seeks. She remains what she always was: brilliant, ambitious, complex, and impossible to reduce to simple categories. Perhaps that is her final triumph. The queen who crafted her own image so carefully in life has become immortal not as a cautionary tale or a romantic heroine, but as an enduring symbol of female power, political genius, and the price of daring to reshape the world. In the end, she was neither Rome's victim nor Egypt's savior. She was Cleopatra, Queen of Kings. And there will never be another quite like her. Epilogue. Eternal Queen. Walk into any major museum today, from the Louvre to the British Museum to the Met, and you'll find her face. Sometimes crowned, sometimes bareheaded, but always unmistakable. Cleopatra, captured in marble, bronze, and paint across 2 millennia. Each image tells us more about its creators than its subject. The Romans cast her as temptress, the Renaissance as tragic heroine, the Victorians as exotic femme fatale. Hollywood transformed her into whatever each era demanded: vamp, victim, feminist icon. But beneath these reimaginings, the real Cleopatra left concrete legacies that shaped our world. The administrative systems she refined in Egypt became the template for Roman imperial governance. Her innovations in shipping and trade, including the standardization of weights and measures across her territories, influenced Mediterranean commerce for centuries. The academic institutions she protected in Alexandria preserved crucial texts that would later help spark the Renaissance. In 2019, marine archaeologists diving off the coast of Alexandria discovered something extraordinary: the remnants of a massive harbor complex built to her specifications that had revolutionized ancient shipping. The engineering was so advanced that modern port designers still study its principles. This was Cleopatra's true genius, not just ruling an empire, but building infrastructure that would outlast it. Her influence on military strategy proved equally enduring. The naval tactics she and Antony developed at Actium, particularly the concept of a mobile reserve fleet, were studied by admirals from Byzantine times through the Age of Sail. Even their ultimate defeat provided crucial lessons in the importance of maintaining clear command structures in combined operations. Modern archaeological work has begun revealing the Egypt she ruled, a far more sophisticated state than Roman propagandists claimed. Recent discoveries in Alexandria have unearthed a cosmopolitan metropolis where Greek philosophy mixed with Egyptian religion and Jewish scholarship. The multicultural empire she envisioned didn't die with her, it simply took another form under Roman rule. Her greatest impact may be the one she would have found most ironic. She became a symbol of Egyptian nationalism. When 19th century Egypt began pushing for independence from European control, Cleopatra emerged as an unlikely heroine, the last independent ruler who had dared to defy Western imperialism. The fact that she was ethnically Greek and culturally international mattered less than what she represented: Egyptian sovereignty. Perhaps most remarkably, Cleopatra achieved something few rulers manage. She controlled her own legend. Every image we have of her, even the hostile Roman accounts, describes the person she crafted herself to be. She understood that power lies not just in armies or gold, but in the ability to shape how history remembers you. The search for her tomb continues. In 2023, new ground-penetrating radar techniques revealed promising structures beneath the Temple of Taposiris Magna. Whether or not we find her final resting place, Cleopatra's true monument is more intangible. She showed that empires could be built on more than military might alone, that power could wear a female face, and that the natural order of any age can be challenged by those bold enough to imagine alternatives. In the end, she was neither the saint of Egyptian nationalism nor the sinner of Roman propaganda. She was something far more interesting, a ruler who tried to forge a different kind of empire, a woman who refused to accept the limitations others placed upon her, and a visionary who dared to challenge the prevailing wisdom about how the world must be ordered. The last pharaoh's final victory was ensuring that we can never forget her. 2,000 years later, we're still trying to understand what she built, what she dreamed, and how close she came to changing everything. In that sense, perhaps Cleopatra achieved the immortality she sought, not as a goddess, but as an eternal question mark in history, forever challenging us to rethink what we believe about power, gender, and the forces that shape our world. After all, isn't that what great rulers do? They don't just rule their own time, they make us question ours.